In April 1945, with the war in Europe entering its final weeks, the Dutch city of Zwolle remained under German occupation. The front was close, German units were overstretched, and discipline across the Wehrmacht was uneven. Allied forces advancing through the Netherlands needed to know whether Zwolle was still defended in strength or already preparing to withdraw. The task of finding out fell to a small reconnaissance patrol from the Canadian Army. One of the men assigned to that patrol was Leo Major, a scout with a reputation for aggression, independence, and an almost reckless disregard for conventional limits. Major was not a senior officer. He did not command troops. His role was simple: observe, report, and return. That was the plan. What followed was not. Shortly after entering the outskirts of Zwolle under cover of darkness, Major's patrol came under fire. In the brief exchange that followed, Major's closest companion was killed. At that moment, the mission should have ended. Standard procedure dictated withdrawal. The loss of a partner during a reconnaissance operation was reason enough to disengage and report back. Major chose otherwise. Instead of turning back, he continued alone. Zwolle at night was tense and silent. Streetlights were dimmed or destroyed. German checkpoints were scattered throughout the city, but coordination between them was weak. Units were isolated, communication unreliable, and morale fragile. The Germans knew the Allies were close. They did not know when the attack would come, or from where. That uncertainty mattered more than numbers. Major moved deliberately through the city, studying patrol patterns, listening for movement, and testing reactions. He threw grenades at strategic points, not to clear positions, but to create confusion. Explosions echoed through the streets, separated by distance and time. To German troops inside the city, it sounded like the opening phase of a coordinated assault. Machine gun fire followed. Major fired briefly, then relocated. Each action reinforced the illusion of multiple attackers. At one point, Major encountered a group of German soldiers. Instead of killing them, he disarmed them and sent them running toward their own lines with a message. The Canadians were coming, and the city was surrounded. This was not mercy. It was psychology. Those soldiers carried panic faster than any explosion could. Throughout the night, German command struggled to make sense of what was happening. Reports conflicted. Some units believed they were under attack by a battalion. Others claimed armored units were already inside the city. Communications broke down. Orders were delayed or ignored. In a garrison already close to collapse, fear spread faster than facts. Major continued moving, striking, disappearing, and striking again. He did not attempt to seize buildings or hold ground. His goal was never to occupy the city. It was to convince the enemy that holding it was no longer possible. By dawn, German troops began withdrawing. Some left in organized columns, others fled individually. By the time Canadian forces entered Zwolle the next day, the Germans were gone. What had begun as a routine reconnaissance mission ended with the liberation of an entire city. Not through force of arms, but through confusion, pressure, and fear. One soldier had exploited the enemy's uncertainty and turned it against them. The German garrison did not flee because it was defeated in battle. It fled because it believed it was about to be. And the man responsible was still inside the city when the panic reached its peak. What made the situation inside Zwolle so volatile was not just the presence of an intruder, but the state of the German garrison itself. By April 1945, many German units in the Netherlands were operating in a state of exhaustion and uncertainty. Supplies were inconsistent, reinforcements were unlikely. Communication with higher command was unreliable or non-existent. Soldiers knew the war was lost, but they did not know how or when it would end. In that environment, fear did not need much encouragement. Major understood this instinctively. He did not behave like a lone infiltrator trying to stay hidden. He behaved like the forward edge of a much larger force. His movements were deliberate and theatrical. Grenades were thrown not at random, but at locations where sound would carry. Shots were fired briefly and then stopped, mimicking the probing fire of advancing units rather than the sustained fire of a single man. After each action, he relocated quickly, ensuring that German patrols never found a fixed position. This constant movement created a pattern the Germans misread. To them, it suggested coordination, multiple teams advancing from different directions. A classic prelude to a night assault. Reports from checkpoints contradicted each other, but they all pointed toward the same conclusion. The Canadians were already inside the city. Without reliable communications, German officers were forced to rely on fragmentary eyewitness accounts, all of which were shaped by stress and expectation. Major reinforced this illusion deliberately. When he captured German soldiers, he did not interrogate them extensively. He told them exactly what he wanted them to believe: that the city was surrounded, that armor was on the way, that resistance would be pointless. Then he sent them back. In any organized defense, prisoners escaping would be a failure. In this case, it was the point. Panic spread faster through frightened men than through command channels. German command structures were not designed to handle this kind of psychological disruption. Doctrine emphasized control, hierarchy, and clarity. When those broke down, junior officers hesitated. Senior officers delayed decisions, waiting for confirmation that never came. Each explosion, each report of gunfire, added urgency without providing clarity. In the absence of certainty, withdrawal became the safest option. By the early hours of the morning, German units began pulling back from their positions. Some attempted to regroup, others abandoned equipment and left immediately. There was no coordinated retreat order. The decision to withdraw emerged organically from fear and confusion rather than command. The garrison unraveled not because it was destroyed, but because it believed destruction was imminent. Major continued his actions long enough to ensure the effect was irreversible. Once withdrawal began, stopping it would have required strong leadership and confidence. Neither remained. When he finally withdrew himself, he did so knowing the city was already lost to the Germans. When Canadian forces entered Zwolle later that day, they expected resistance. Instead, they found an empty city. Defensive positions abandoned, weapons left behind. No organized enemy presence. The liberation was complete, achieved without the costly urban fighting that commanders had feared. From a tactical standpoint, the operation defied conventional logic. One man could not defeat a garrison, but that was never what happened. Major did not defeat the Germans militarily. He defeated their confidence. He forced them to imagine a threat larger than reality and then act on that fear. The city fell not because it was taken, but because it was surrendered to panic. As the German withdrawal gathered momentum, Leo Major did not press his luck. He had no intention of being caught inside the city once daylight exposed movement and positions. His objective had already been achieved. Panic had taken hold, and panic, once set in motion, rarely reverses itself. Major shifted his focus from disruption to survival. He moved carefully, avoiding main streets and withdrawing along routes he had already tested earlier in the night. German patrols were no longer searching methodically. They were retreating. Some moved quickly, others hesitated, unsure whether to follow orders or flee independently. That disorganization created gaps. Major used them. He did not fire again. Silence now served him better than noise. By the time dawn approached, the city was already emptying. German units pulled out in different directions, abandoning checkpoints and defensive positions that had been held for years. Equipment was left behind, ammunition dumped, vehicles disabled or simply abandoned. To an outside observer, it would have looked like the aftermath of a major engagement. In reality, no such battle had taken place. Major exited the city before first light and made his way back to Canadian lines. When he reported what he had seen, the reaction was disbelief. Reconnaissance patrols were not expected to liberate cities. His account sounded exaggerated, even implausible. Commanders assumed the Germans must have withdrawn for other reasons. Major did not argue. He had no interest in convincing anyone. He had completed his task. Only later, when Canadian units entered Zwolle without resistance, did the scale of what had happened become clear. There had been no coordinated German withdrawal order from higher command, no planned evacuation. The garrison had simply collapsed. Fear, uncertainty, and misinformation had done what artillery and infantry assaults might not have achieved without heavy losses. For the people of Zwolle, the liberation came quietly. There was no street fighting, no shelling, no destruction in the final hours. The city was spared the kind of urban combat that had devastated so many others in the closing months of the war. Civilians emerged cautiously, unsure whether the Germans were truly gone. By midday, Canadian troops confirmed it. The occupation had ended. Major did not take part in the celebrations. He remained a scout, already preparing for the next assignment. To him, the night's actions were not heroic. They were practical. He had exploited an opportunity presented by enemy weakness and acted decisively. That was all. From a historical perspective, the liberation of Zwolle stands out because of what did not happen. There was no pitched battle, no mass casualties, no destruction of infrastructure. One man's understanding of fear and momentum had altered the outcome of an entire operation. Yet the story did not spread widely at the time. There were bigger battles still unfolding, larger formations advancing, more dramatic narratives competing for attention. Major's actions were noted, but they did not fit neatly into official categories. They were too unconventional, too dependent on individual judgment. What remained undeniable was the result. An entire German garrison had fled a city not because it was defeated, but because it believed defeat was inevitable. And that belief had been manufactured by one soldier, moving alone through the dark. In the days that followed the liberation of Zwolle, Canadian commanders began to piece together what had actually happened. Patrol reports confirmed that the German withdrawal had not been ordered by higher headquarters. There were no signs of a planned evacuation, no evidence of a coordinated retreat under pressure from advancing units. Instead, German positions appeared to have dissolved from within. Equipment was left behind. Defensive plans were abandoned. The garrison had broken apart in confusion. For military analysts, the explanation was uncomfortable but clear. The Germans had not been forced out by superior firepower. They had been forced out by fear. Leo Major's actions exploited the psychological fragility of a unit that already believed the war was lost. His movements created the illusion of inevitability. Once that belief took hold, discipline collapsed. The city was spared destruction because the enemy chose flight over resistance. Zwolle's civilians understood the outcome long before the full story emerged. Unlike many other cities in the Netherlands, Zwolle had avoided last-minute street fighting, shelling, and civilian casualties. Homes were intact. Infrastructure was largely undamaged. The occupation ended not in ruins, but in silence. For the people who lived there, the absence of battle mattered more than the details of how it had been achieved. Leo Major did not seek recognition for what he had done. When offered a medal for the operation, he refused it, citing personal reasons and dissatisfaction with certain Allied commanders. This was not unusual for him. Throughout the war, Major repeatedly rejected formal praise, preferring to remain a scout operating on the margins of official narratives. His effectiveness came from independence, not conformity. Years later, as historians revisited the final months of the war in Western Europe, the Zwolle incident stood out as a rare example of psychological warfare conducted instinctively rather than doctrinally. Major had not followed a plan. He had read a situation and acted decisively, trusting that fear would do the rest. In doing so, he demonstrated a truth often overlooked in military history, that perception can matter more than force. The Germans did not flee because they were attacked. They fled because they believed an attack was inevitable and overwhelming. That belief was created deliberately, patiently, and alone. One man, moving through a dark city, had shifted the balance of an entire garrison. Today, Leo Major's name is remembered in Zwolle. Streets bear witness to the night the city was freed without a fight. His story endures not because it is dramatic, but because it is rare. It shows how understanding the enemy's mindset can achieve what weapons sometimes cannot. In a war defined by mass armies and industrial destruction, the liberation of Zwolle remains a reminder that sometimes history turns on a single individual willing to act when everyone else expects retreat.